Welcome back to our second podcast episode. For those of you who must be joining for the first time, let me reintroduce the Financial Supervisors Academy, the FSA. The FSA is dedicated to equip our staff and financial supervisors with the necessary expertise and technical competencies. Its objective is to foster a culture of continuous training and improvement, where experienced supervisors are encouraged to share the knowledge, ensuring that we stay at the forefront of the ever-evolving financial landscape. By way of an introduction, I am Herman Chapara. My role at the MFSA is that of a head of FinTech supervision. My function is responsible for supervising the crypto assets sector, as well as the financial institutions. Today's podcast will focus on the introduction of MiCA, the Markets and Crypto Assets Regulation. With me, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Jonathan Gallia, a lawyer by profession, whose name is synonymous with blockchain and crypto assets. Today, he is joining us in his capacity as chairman of the Virtual Financial Assets Business Unit within the Chamber of Commerce, which is essentially the association of the entities involved in the crypto asset space in Malta. With Jonathan, I am also pleased to host my colleague, Camille Pepos, the deputy head within my function, who essentially leads the authorization and supervisory efforts within the crypto asset space in Malta. So, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Thank you.
To dive straight into the subject, MiCA is finally here. The wait is over. We've been waiting for it since when it was published, way back in September 2020. Earlier this month it was published. Now it is in force. The wait is over, guys. This is, I think, a historic moment for the crypto asset space. It's going to change everything. It's essentially being marked as the world's first comprehensive piece of legislation that's regulating crypto assets. And it covers the whole region, the whole EU. So my first big question, and I'll start with you, Jonathan, if I may, but Camille, please feel free to contribute. MiCA will, of course, it's a regulation. It will harmonize the treatment of crypto assets across the EU. What do you think? Will this actually harmonize the crypto asset space in the EU? And also, if we manage to do that, do you think it will be taken as a good example and potentially being mimicked across other jurisdictions? And finally, we reach the space of having a global regulated crypto market?
First of all, thanks for the invitation, Herman. And let me tackle straight away the first question. As you rightly mentioned, this is, I would say, the first effort in terms of issuing, I would say, the most comprehensive legislative framework ever targeting the crypto asset space. So we are in a bit of a, let's say, terra incognita. And we still have to see what's going to happen in terms of, again, the effect that this will have on the crypto ecosystem within Europe. Now, as you rightly mentioned, it's a regulation as opposed to a directive. And the aim, therefore, is to have a maximum level of harmonization across the European bloc in terms of the issuances, offerings, and also the provision of services in relation to crypto assets. However, MiCA is not the only regulation existing within a European framework. And incidentally, although the definition of crypto assets is wide-ranging and very generic, there are certain exceptions to, let's say, definition of a crypto asset, which are covered under MiCA, most notably of which is the exclusion pertinent to those crypto assets that qualifies financial instruments under MiFID II. And incidentally, MiFID is a directive. So I guess you can see where I'm going now with this.
Sure, of course.
We still have to see in terms of, again, what will actually be excluded from MiCA scope when it comes to what is qualified as a financial instrument under MiFID. Since the way that MiFID has been transposed by the various EU member states naturally leads to a bit of a fragmented approach in terms of what constitutes a financial instrument in one state and not another.
And this is crucial, right?
This is crucial because otherwise there can be a very likely scenario, where an EU member state can argue that it excludes a particular type of crypto asset from its own implementation of MiCA,
When someone else is
while
actually-
someone else actually would say, well, no, we don't agree because that particular instrument, that particular asset is not treated as a financial instrument within
That's
our
not
own.
a happy situation to be in.
It's not a happy situation to
But
be
I
in
guess
at all.
in that case, maybe ESMA will kick in and try to sort out the disaster effect that might have.
Certainly. I mean, one clear example which comes to mind are those crypto assets, which serve a particular utility, say a payment utility or governance utility, but then also entitle the holder to receive revenues generated by the underlying protocol. Now, there's an open-ended debate on whether that constitutes a financial instrument or not, since transferable securities grant the right to receive profits and not revenues. We might be splitting hairs over here, but the definition, the list of financial instruments under MiFID is quite restrictive.
The devil is in the detail, right?
Indeed. And this may be treated as a financial instrument by some EU member states, but not a financial instrument by some other member states.
So what I read from that excellent reply is that, yes, MiCA is great, it's regulation, we need it, it will bring in some harmonization within the space, but since obviously it's working alongside other legislative spaces like MiFID, notably MiFID, and there's, because of being a directive and the way it's being implemented in different jurisdictions, there might be some contradictions coming out in terms of definitions. This is going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting.
Certainly will.
But for sure, I'm hoping that jurisdictions will come together at ESMA, under ESMA's direction, and we need to sort out the differences, because essentially we need to drive forward in this.
I fully agree, and hopefully also there will be some much needed and long sought clarification
Guidance,
on, I would say, certain instruments like derivatives, which have as their underlying asset crypto assets, but which are settled, for instance, in another form of crypto asset. Since if one takes a restrictive interpretation of derivatives under MiFID, well, one can arrive to the reasonable conclusion that they are not included within the list of derivative instruments under MiFID. Again, just another example which I would hope
this is
again
the
will be
topic of our
tackled.
next podcast, I guess. we just kicked up our next. Thanks for that, Jonathan. Would you like to add anything else to that, Camille, or shall we move on to the next question?
Yes, I can add a bit. Obviously, the MiCA is layer 1 regulation. Yes, it will harmonize the regulation. All EU member states will have the same. There's the concept of passporting, but of course, full harmonization can only be achieved if all national competent authorities are aligned in terms of approach, essentially. And this is key. We know that there's a lot of area of MiCA that are not in the text. There's still a lot to discuss. And as we said, devil is in the details. So what we're seeing, and we're very pleased to see that, is that both EBA and ESMA have taken a leading role in this harmonization or supervisory convergence, if you were to call it. There's many working groups. We're part of many of them. We're very pleased that we're able to share even our experience and contribute to the discussion. We know that there's already a schedule of RTS, regulatory technical standards, that should clarify many of the finer details and approach. For example, how do you authorize a CAS? What type of document do you ask? Right now, we know that the place is fragmented. Everyone has a different framework. And even with the same, right now, all the EU member states have AMLD5, and we're already noticing from one regulator to another a very different approach. Level of documentation that is required, intrusive, etc. So I think there is a bit more than 50 of those RTSs, 52, I believe is the exact number right now, that needs to be issued. So I think this is really a space we need to look at. This is really important that we get it right.
Of course, because this will bring in an element of regulatory arbitrage as well. Right?
Completely regulatory arbitrage,
and that's the last thing we want.
Yes, and also this might negate some of the benefit or some of the advantage that MiCA introduced. So rightfully so, at the beginning you mentioned the idea that MiCA could be seen as an example across the world. The legislation is great, every lawyers would agree on that, but how do you implement it?
Sure.
Could either be a massive success or a disaster. And here we have a shot at being leader as EU and the crypto space, or we could get lost into the details and not achieve the objective that we have set. So this is really key. We know that we're on a very tight schedule. Both EBA and ESMA have the objective of having all the RTSs
the clock is ticking.
published before everything is applicable. So just for context, everything related to stablecoin, I'll generalize the term, would be applicable in 12 months' time. And for CASP, commonly known as VAS, is in 18 months' time.
Correct.
If anyone has ever been involved in drafting RTSs, you will know that this is very short, because obviously you need consensus. So we're talking about every competent authorities having an opinion. There's drafting working group,
Consultation,
of course. And that's just internal, as in from the public sector. Then you will have to speak to the private sector,
Sure.
which might, again, throw out completely the initial draft. So really tight. We need to work hard on that. But this could be really the key to our success and really implementing a regulation that, achieve the objective it has set.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll ask you the next question, which essentially, what do you think are the opportunities and challenges that you see lying ahead of what we now call CASPs, the crypto asset service providers, which MiCA will bring about?
Okay, so a first obvious one is regulatory clarity. I think this is really important. We know that the space has evolved. A couple of years ago, it might have been qualified as the Wild Wild West. Operator didn't know how to comply or what type of requirement they need to comply to. We still see that scenario in multiple jurisdictions, and I wouldn't mention one across the Atlantic, but we don't know where we stand. So as an entrepreneur, as someone in the business, I would find it really, really difficult to enter the space. I don't know where I stand. So regulatory clarity is obviously quite important. On top of that, as we mentioned right now, the place is fragmented. Having a harmonized approach and a level playing field is key.
At least in the EU region, right?
Exactly. In the EU region, we're seeing right now, as a base layer, we have AMLD5 requirement, which are essentially KYC and onboarding. Let's generalize those. While other jurisdictions, such as ours here in Malta, have conduct and prudential requirements. So one could say that we're not competitive, or that our operator face a harsh competition because their direct competition don't need to abide by the same requirements,
Exactly.
which obviously is an issue. So a level playing field is obviously welcome. And last opportunity is to reach this single market, which is the main idea behind EU. So very pleased with that.
And bringing crypto assets to a fully regulated space, which therefore makes it more acceptable to
correct. This is
investors,
a legitimate business.
Exactly.
This is a serious business. This is regulated industry.
It's becoming real. Yes,
it's becoming real. I mean, Bitcoin has been created more than 10 years ago. It's happening only now, but it's becoming real, which is a bit strange when you look at the main ideology behind Bitcoin. But this is the world we live in.
Challenges.
Some challenges. Definitely, there is some investment that would be needed, not only from the regulator but from the operator, because from what we're seeing, from what we've experienced, this is a massive step up from just an MLD5 registration.
For sure.
Simply having KYC and onboarding requirements is far from enough when you want to be licensed and abide by prudential and conduct requirement. A lot of investments needs to be carried out. So
they need to step up. Yeah.
They need to step up. That means extra resources, extra system, and generally maturing in your compliance culture.
For sure.
AML. Everyone is accustomed to that now. I think this is common. I mean, every business understands the need for AML. But when we get into the corporate governance, the 3-line model, risk management, internal audit, this is already much more of mature concept that were present in financial industry, but generally are not known from a more startup-like population, because this is what we're dealing with. So that's something to be on the lookout for. The other main challenge that I'm seeing is the potential bottlenecks or delays. From the estimation of even ESMA, there is roughly 1,000 VASP that would qualify as CASP and will need to be authorized in 18 months. If you just divide it by the number of member states, you see that we have roughly 50 CASP per jurisdiction that will need to apply. We know from experience with the VFA Act and authorizing those operators that it takes time. This is not a matter of weeks; it's a matter of months.
There is actually the grandfathering period, which allows them to keep on operating for another 18 months. But we're not too sure which jurisdiction, which member state will actually use that grandfathering period, depending on how good they feel with their current
absolutely.
legislation. So that still need to be seen.
Definitely, we know there's the first 18 months for the provision for CAS to be applicable, and then there's that extra 18 months for everyone in the jurisdiction to get aligned and get authorized. Yet 18 months is very short, because essentially you cannot submit an application before the initial 18 months.
Sure.
So we're still talking about a period of 18 months to get 50 CASP. Some jurisdiction will have more. Bigger jurisdiction will have 200,
it's
300.
Not going to average out for sure.
So Jonathan. Delays, yes.
But I'd like to discuss further on this particular point, in fact, because there's going to be a massive difference between, let's say, regulating CASPs under the fifth AMLD regime and regulating them under a far more comprehensive regime, which entails a full license, first of all. Secondly, the requirements are not even comparable. So going back to the transit provisions under MiCA, which essentially state that CASPs will be allowed to operate for an additional 18 months after the date of applicability, according, I would say, to their national registration or license, whichever might apply accordingly. It is interesting to know that there is an opt-out clause under that same provision, which states that if member states feel that they don't have a national framework which is deemed to be MiCA equivalent, well, they have the option rather than the obligation, interestingly enough.
Either reduce or actually not apply at all.
Exactly.
Provision.
So that would be, we really have to watch out for that, and the CASPs themselves have to watch out for that, because that will limit their space.
There will be two options, potentially. Either in the next 12 months, we're going to see certain EU member states radically overhaul their national frameworks in order to make them MiCA equivalent. Or otherwise, they will not be in a position to offer that additional transitory period, that additional grandfathering period. Because if, let's imagine they decide to be cheeky and they decide not to opt out and apply the full transitory period. Well, of course, then the next issue which will arise is that the moment that their nationally regulated CASPs try to passport their services in the 18-month grandfathering period, well, there's a strong likelihood that the host member state, the competent authority of the host member state,
I believe they cannot use the passporting capability if they are not licensed properly under MiCA. So within that transitory period, I don't think passporting will actually apply.
This is our current interpretation. We looked at it because we thought of this exact point of saying, right now there's different national regime. Why would a CASP under a different regime be allowed to passport in? Or current interpretation, again, might be subject to changes, is that to passport, you have to be licensed as a CASP. To be licensed as a CASP, you have to go through the authorization and whatnot. The grandfathering should not include passporting requirements, so it should be just to stay within your national...
Then again, to add a complication to that scenario, Camille, let's not forget that most VASPs are registered in different member states anyway. So does it mean they can still keep operating in different member states with their MLD5 registration under the transitory period concurrently? And that's almost equates to passporting, right? So again, not an easy one.
It's the interpretation is not that clear, because I think there are two different schools of thought. The one which you just propounded, because essentially the definition of a CASP does state that they need to be licensed in accordance with the relevant provisions under MiCA. But then again, the transfer provisions are at the very end, and typically the interpretation to a law is that let's say that which comes afterwards tends to take precedence over that which comes before.
So this is something we need to clarify going forward.
For sure. I mean, this might be a bit selfish of us, but in our opinion, you should not be able to passport if you're just on the national regime, because there again, there's not a level playing field. It's absolutely not equivalent. I mean, passporting, the principle behind is you're regulated the same as me, and I feel confident you providing services.
I think that would go against the whole concept of having an EU-wide regulation.
Still, I would say that those member states which have a national MiCA equivalent framework will be able to apply the so-called MiCA Light licensing process that is afforded under the transitory provisions in a much more rapid manner than those which do not.
But how many jurisdictions have a MiCA equivalent?
not too many. Not too many. But I think this is being tackled by ESMA, and ESMA is already sounding member states to understand how the next few months will evolve and how the scene will act out.
On that, actually, because that very point was made during multiple working group, and we've seen ESMA actually going on the data collection and issuing survey and say, okay, if you think that you're MiCA equivalent, show me. And every NCA had to answer and say, those are the provision, this is how I implemented
this is what I'm
those
thinking.
type of requirements. So we feel pretty confident with our own framework, but we'll have to see. We're not the final decision maker. We're hoping that passporting will not be available to the grandfathering, but we have to see. I mean, time will tell, literally.
Okay, let's move on. I'd like to bring an element to. So we've discussed about opportunities and challenges. Let's bring it back to Malta. Of course, you well know that we do have a local regime here. We've been using what we call the VFA framework, the Virtual Financial Assets Framework, since November 2018. So what benefits do you think Malta will be able to offer to the industry upon MiCA's applicability, the time frame that mentioned by Camille? What benefits do we offer as a jurisdiction to these players?
All right. I'll speak about the legislation and the regulator, and Jonathan might be able to speak about the industry. From the public sector or regulatory framework, of course, I cannot emphasize more that the VFA framework is MiCA equivalent. If not, certain would interpret it as VFA. The VFA Act is even more stringent than MiCA, and we've seen
it's
that
based on MiFID, both
they share the same principle.
Yes.
Exactly. So sharing the same roots, sharing the same concept, the same type of services, the same treatment of crypto assets, even in terms of asset classification. So we feel very, very confident that we're there, which obviously means that we can draw from our experience as regulator, authorizing, supervising, and of course, our industry of locally licensed VFA service provider.
For the sake of our audience, maybe in 2 minutes, run through what we've done over the last 4 years.
Of course, I'll try. So,
2 minutes, 4 years in 2 minutes.
Very tough. So November 2018, VFA Act was enacted with a 1-year transitory period. November 2019 was when we first started receiving application, or at least operator expressed an interest in applying. Throughout 2020 is when we actually looked at all those applications. So you see there's a delay, quite a lot of documentation.
And you mentioned, to tie it back to your previous point, on the delays. Roughly, on average, how much time did we take to authorize, for example, an exchange, a crypto exchange?
So I would say from...
Because this will reflect to what might happen going forward.
Yes, of course. I would say from the submission of a complete application between 6 and 8 and 9 months, something like that. Again, submission of a complete application. And I think this is where there was
That's a crux, yes.
a lot of understatement, because a complete application means that there's an answer to all my potential questions. And this is where we saw that there was really a learning curve for the market. It's, of course, my business plan. It's, of course, whose individual are going to be behind. It's all due diligence documents. So it's really a lot. And if you've never been accustomed to the regulated industry, this is a massive gap. And
let's face it, the chances are that most CUSPs are technology companies, right?
Of course.
Not used to traditional financial services
completely. And we've seen that certain of our question, because the vast didn't have answer, they needed few weeks to digest, speak to qualified professionals such as Jonathan or other VF agents, and say, okay, what does the regulator want here? I'm not necessarily understanding and we're not speaking the same language. So that took some time, quite a learning curve. So let's go back
to be fair, if I may be autocritical here, it took time for us to even understand the business models.
Of course, time for us we're talking about brand new business model.
To having a piece of legislation and making it work in practice. That takes time.
I mean, every piece of legislation needs to be interpreted. And I mean, you can state, I want this requirement to be complied to in a satisfactory manner. What does satisfactory manner mean? It's a lot of trial and error. Also, and I think that's reflective of the trial and error and whatever, I believe that since we've issued the first rule book, which was in 2019, we've issued 4 revisions to it. Because we had to constantly challenge our own interpretation and what do we require? I mean, how do you mitigate risk? To mitigate risk, I need to understand the risk. My understanding of the risk of the industry in 2019 and today is completely different.
Sure.
We're much more mature today, so I would require less, or I'm able to be more proportionate. So 2020, we assessed all application. This essentially, by the end of 2020, to each applicant, we either issue the green light, which we call an in-principle approval, or we said, sorry, buddy, you're not going to make it, so it's time for you to move on.
In fact, I believe half of the applications were either voluntary surrendered,
yes, not everyone,
some even refused.
Exactly, not everyone made the cut. I mean,
that's also interesting going forward. There's no guarantee that the current number of guys out there will actually make it to the MiCA standard.
And which right now is even a more dangerous situation, because imagine if you're currently a VASP under an AMLD5, you've built your business for a couple years and you don't make the cut and you need to terminate. I mean, we're talking about 3-4 years of investment. There's a real company, there's employees. We're not talking about an idea, a seed.
This is
2018. Happening. Who was around? There's no big player.
So that's one of the challenges and the preparation.
100%.
How serious this needs to be taken by the players themselves.
Absolutely. The moment we passed on this authorization from 21 onward until today, this is where we had to switch our hats, become supervisor.
Yes.
So this is where you said, okay, you passed my initial assessment, great. But let's meet you. Let's visit you.
Yes.
Let's actually come to your offices. Do you have an office? And this is where COVID didn't help, of course. So we carried out some remote inspection. But say, okay, in practice, tell me what you're doing, because we all know that it's very easy to get perfect policies and procedures drafted. I mean, this is almost an academic exercise.
Sure.
I can draft the perfect business plan. That doesn't mean this is what I'm doing.
Yes.
So this is where we had to switch that. So throughout this entire journey, we learn a lot. I cannot emphasize this more. And we would challenge our understanding, our knowledge, etc. So I would say that right now we're an experienced crypto regulator. We're not the only one. Let's not forget also FIU, which is the AML regulator.
Sure. I think it's the ecosystem that has matured over time.
Completely. I mean, we have an AML regulator that understands crypto fully, that is very well equipped, even for analysis. They have the tools, they have the knowledge.
And it's not just the FIU. I
the
think
police
it's
as
the
well.
police, it's the sanctions
everyone.
monitoring board, it's the asset recovery bureau.
Exactly.
Even the courts had to step up, right?
Yes, because it's not only the financial regulator. We're the beginning of the journey, because
sure.
You become licensed, but then you have so many obligations and
again,
so many
also I
requirements.
would, if I may add, the accountants, the consultants, the advisory services, the lawyers, everyone has been
exactly, and
geared up.
I think Jonathan can mention that. I mean, we have a network of really qualified professionals, you know, and I think that even the fact that they have a business section.
In fact, I'll get into that. That's a perfect transition to my next question, Jonathan, to you. Can you tell us a bit more about this VFA business unit within the Chamber of Commerce, what it is, what it does, who the members are, and why have an association anyway?
Would I also be given 2 minutes? Because this was quite a lengthy 2 minutes.
Yes, I always say
the same 2 minutes.
I always say 2 minutes, but Camille just runs away with my 2 minutes.
No worries. So, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, Herman, the business unit essentially represents the VFA industry here in Malta. And representation, I would say, is particularly important because, as you also rightly mentioned, this is pretty much a new industry altogether.
Sure.
Some liken it to the financial services industry, but there are some key differences, most notably of which, of course, is the use of the technology within the crypto asset ecosystem, which is, I would say, quite different to what we have been used to date. So this is just, one of the points that, I would say, merits both, let's say, a technical understanding of the industry as well as the ability to bridge the technical part with the legal, the regulatory parts, etc., what we term as, I would say, the traditional frameworks. And through the representation of the industry, we have been able to, for instance, voice any concerns, any questions of the industry in more of a holistic manner, rather than more of a fragmented approach. Because ultimately, when there are certain, let's say, perhaps issues which are voiced in a different way, or perhaps some voice them and some don't, then that leads to an altogether fragmented view of the industry itself, which does not lend itself to helping the industry progress itself further and grow within a mature
And I would
environment.
say this industry does have its own unique specificities and needs, which not necessarily everyone understands as well.
No, certainly. I mean, let me perhaps, bring to the fore a bit of a silly example. Let's say that there's a particular VFA service provider which wants to offer staking services to its own users. Now, right off the bat, one might question, well, are we referring to staking in terms of verification, proof of stake systems? Are we referring to staking more in terms of deposits by users, which then have interest accruing on them? And as I said, this is just, one slight example, but ultimately it does lend itself to potentially different interpretations. And it's best if there's a unified voice, or perhaps a singular representative, which is able to bring to the fore this particular topic and have it discussed with the different supervisory authorities, be it the MFSA, be it the FIU, be it other authorities altogether.
And from, if I may add to that, from our side, being the guys doing the regulation and the supervision, it helps us to have one single point of contact as well. And we've used the business unit on many occasions when we had to, because of something happened, whether it was sanctions kicking in the crypto space last what was it, March? Yeah. It's really important to have a go-to place, really easy, get the guys together, discuss frankly with everyone, reach consensus, plan a way forward. So being organized does have its good points, and we really enjoy working with you, and I think it's super beneficial to both sides. So
The feeling is definitely mutual. And in fact, to add to your point as well, the reality is that this is such a fast-moving industry,
as well,
especially when there are, let's call them favorable market conditions, that it evolves almost on a daily basis.
And we need to learn together in this as well, because
definitely
it is, you mentioned in the beginning, this is a new territory. It's a new world out there, and we're, every step we make, we're discovering new nuances and opportunities as well. Okay, let me move on to my next question. MiCA will also extend potential usage of crypto assets to already licensed entities, traditional entities like investment services providers, credit institutions, financial institutions. What's your take on this? Essentially, MiCA allows these license holders not even to reauthorize themselves, just notify and they could start meddling about offering services in the crypto space, potentially a space that they're not used to or they used to hate up to yesterday, right? So what's your take on this? Do you think it will happen? Do you think they will actually take on the challenge of crypto assets? Will it evolve? Will the sectors suddenly collide and align and become one? Because this is interesting. This is like taking crypto assets to the next level. So, this is for both of you. So potentially from a regulatory supervisory perspective, but also, I think more interestingly, from a market perspective as well.
All right. So there's many advantages of those exemption and whatever. Most notably, the ability to offer a new asset class, essentially, with your existing license. So what that means in practice is that a lot of our traditionally licensed operators are able to develop a new product line, offer new services to their clients, new revenue stream, etc., without the need of creating a completely separate legal entity, having a new setup, which we understand might not be viable from a business perspective. So we know that in the past, some traditional player might have been interested, but, cost-benefit analysis and say, does it make sense for me to create a brand new setup? No. So they might have shied away from, dealing with
because
that
we did have the segregation of entities and requirement in Malta.
Yes, but even because those services were not possible with their existing.
For sure.
So in all cases, they needed a new structure. Correct. Which involve a lot of operational issues. So that's great. We might see some innovation, or we might see some surprise. I'm hoping some of the incumbents saying, hey, this crypto seems to be
suddenly a change of heart, and especially the banks who have been traditionally very much keeping hands off the crypto space, suddenly becoming crypto guys themselves.
Yes, definitely, and that introduces also some other benefits. We know that crypto is a profitable business. There's a reason why there's so many people in that industry. So could that help boost a company's profitability? Could that help a company acquire new clients? There's a lot of benefit. If you have a bit of a traditional operation, we know the competition is harsh. We know in certain segments, your margin are very low. By developing a new crypto service, can your business benefit from it? Yes, of course. And I think that's wonderful. Even in terms of investment, it has been proven multiple times by even statistical study that having a bit of crypto in your portfolio can help you because you're not tied entirely to the financial markets. So, it brings a kick, a new flavor, just like you discover a new spice. Hey, that's nice. it changed a bit. So that's really, really interesting. And yes, obviously we're hoping for a bit of a change in the culture of saying
The
let's-
appetite, right?
the appetite, saying crypto is not the devil. I mean, this is a heavily regulated industry, or it will be.
Or at an equivalent level of regulation.
Exactly, and that I think would benefit the entire ecosystem,
Sure.
really.
Jonathan.
I do think that, let's say, the exemptions afforded to financial institutions, especially to credit institutions, are a bit generous. And let me bring an example.
I do believe so.
They are.
Because let's
It's
actually
like
mention.
your bank, do everything you want.
But let's mention, let's bring sports into the picture. And let's recall that famous fight between Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather. Conor McGregor was, of course, the undisputed champion in MMA, and he had all the qualifications to be able to take on anyone who also fights in MMA.
It was the bank, right?
But the moment, but the moment that again he challenged someone who practices a different sport altogether, which is boxing, well, we all know what the result was. So effectively, this may very much be the same problem that will likely, let's say, be faced, or rather that banks will be facing when, of course, they're given a bit of a, let's say, free ride in terms of offering crypto asset services to their users, which potentially could be exacerbated by the simple fact that banks have a much vaster outreach to retail users than CASPs themselves. So how is this going to evolve? Well, I mean, time will tell, but I do foresee that there will be, I think, a lot of issues cropping up simply because banks will be underestimating what it means to offer crypto asset services.
Mm-hmm.
You might be an athlete, but this is not your sport.
That's the reality. And banks are arguably the most strictly regulated entities, within the financial realm.
Yes.
But again,
we'll have to
it's not the same
understand
space.
the appetite. But again, if it's more regulated, more harmonized, then potentially, yes, there'll be an appetite to let's get in there, and it's not going to cost us anything else. We're licensed already. Let's get our share of the pie. But it will definitely be interesting. For sure, I do see some convergence and some overlapping between what is now pure investment space, what is now banking and payment space. I think also going on to my next question vis-a-vis stable coins and how these are being treated within MiCA, the EMTs of this world and the arts of this world.
Perfect example of convergence. I mean,
yes,
is
the space.
electronic money.
What's your take on this? How EMT taking over e-money? Is e-money dead? Will totally replaced by EMTs?
So first of all, I think let us keep in mind that potentially the treatment of stable coins under MiCA.
And if I may bring in central bank digital currencies as well.
But that's a topic for another.
That's for another podcast. This is okay. Number 4, podcast 4. Okay.
I mean, let us not forget that I think, let's say, it's reasonable and fair to say that the inclusion of stablecoins under MiCA was also a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the back then Libra project by Facebook.
This is essentially what started the whole.
Arguably so.
Yes.
Gold rush sort of thing.
And this is reflected when you see the concept of significant.
Yes,
it was really. Let's make sure we don't have a very big player that comes in
that will take over.
And in fact, testament to this is that apart from the treatment of EMTs as essentially electronic money, let's keep in mind as well that there are some pretty significant restrictions on ARTs, asset reference tokens, and if they exceed these particular restrictions, well, one of the actions that needs to be taken straight away is to stop the issuance of these ARTs, which is a clear shot across the bow to, let's say, stable coins, and if I may add, also a bit of a favorable treatment to the incoming digital euro as well.
Definitely.
We cannot comment too much about that. That's politically sensitive, I would say. But yes, it's because it's the challenge to the status quo, right? To the sovereignty of the euro and financial stability and things that go well beyond this podcast. But yes, we're going into again uncharted space. And these are the brakes being applied by the law to make sure that we don't lose the balance here.
In fact, then from a completely different perspective, the industry did not help itself much. I mean, again, I think it's pretty much fresh in everyone's memories.
We've had a few failures, yes.
There was the UST failure of Terra Luna. And this, in turn, I would say, harmed greatly any, let's say, faith that there was in the so-called algorithmic stablecoins.
Correct.
Which,
in fact, because even the timing, as it happened, I think the evolving ecosystem with Terra Luna, with the FTXs of this world, we were actually like checking, would this happen with how will MiCA react to this kind of scenario?
But the thing is,
would this have happened under MiCA sort of thing?
Possibly the way that stablecoins have been both classified and regulated. I mean, one point which comes to mind, for instance, is that reserve assets can only be invested in financial instruments, which automatically greatly restricts, let's say, any kind of innovation happening in the stablecoin space within Europe. Because especially if we're going to be talking about algorithmic stablecoins, I think that if we are ever to achieve, let's say, a working algorithmic stablecoin, then essentially, especially we're talking about the reserve assets, they also need to be likewise digital. Because the moment you introduce, let's say, let's call them that physical reserve assets, well, you're greatly reducing the chance of that algorithmic stablecoin working as it's meant to be.
It's almost impossible, yes, for sure.
We'll have to see really securitization taking a leap, because right now we're not seeing that. So yes, the moment that capital markets are fully digital and on DLT, we might see that, where say, okay, I'm able to invest in a financial instrument, but it will have to be on DLT because it doesn't work out for me. I mean, otherwise, how can they work?
That's the direction, right?
Arguably as well. I don't know whether this was intended or not by the legislator, but this may also potentially open up the door as well for tokenized financial instruments, which are not, however, regarded as financial instruments. Because if you have a crypto asset, which is either an ART or an EMT, but then the reserve assets are invested in financial instruments, and somehow its design is that it doesn't classify as, let's say, a derivative, then in that case, we have actually a crypto asset which falls squarely under MiCA, but then the reserve assets are financial instruments. Yes. What's going to happen over there? Is that an intended consequence? So I think there's, of course, pleasures yet to come, but...
Yes, let's for sure, this is MiCA version 1.0. It's I think, a solid attempt of getting things together, but it's 1.0. We'll have to learn from it, from what has worked and what has worked less, like PSD2 review. I mean, and that's in a space that we know so well. That's a space that's been evolving over time. But it's payments, something that we're very much used to, let alone the space that we're talking about right now. So, okay, guys, we've talked a bit about MiCA, where we're going, and the effects. Camille, back to you. MiCA and the MFSA, how are we preparing for this implementation? We've already discussed that. Okay, we're maybe in a pretty good place because we've been blessed or unblessed with being one of the first jurisdictions to have, let's say, a fairly equivalent framework in place. We've been playing with it for the last few years. Are we good to go? What are we doing in terms of preparing ourselves, preparing our license holders, preparing for the potential influx of applications? Where are we, and how are we dealing with this?
I wish we were good to go. That would make
Don't give out too many secrets. Okay?
That would make my life a bit easier. No, we're in a good place, but there is plenty of work to be done. What we don't want is that we rest on our past achievement or past processes and lose that competitive edge. We're in a good position. If we want to maintain that leadership, let's call it this way, we need to continue. So first is from a regulatory perspective. We carried out a gap analysis, quite a thorough one, almost line by line. MiCA is close to 500 pages, so
That's a lot of lines, yeah.
So it's a lot of lines. So you can imagine the work that went behind it of saying, okay, VFA Act, MiCA regulation, how do we tally? What's different? Because obviously today we have licensed VFA service provider. Tomorrow will be CASP. What do they need to change? I mean, just to answer that simple question. So
what do we need to change to get them there?
Of course. So that was the first that gap analysis. I think we publicly shared that we wish to become closer to MiCA and certain policy
with our current framework.
Correct, with our current framework, which is the VFA Act, VFA regulation, and the rule book. So there is certain tweaks that we can make. Obviously, those are policy decision, way above my pay grade. But we can propose, saying, hey, why don't we bridge the gap? Why don't we align?
Well, now there is, right. It's in force, right? There is. We know exactly what Europe is doing, and it would be rather strange not to align to what Europe is saying anyway. So because this is the benchmark now. So let's fix our little gaps.
We know there's a time limit to our own framework. I mean, it's going to end. It's going to be repealed.
So yes, this is important. Essentially, it's quite obvious, but we might as well say it here, that the minute that MiCA becomes applicable, I think 30 for caps 30th December 2024. So that's a pretty, while we're all drinking for Happy New Year, we'll have the first application coming in. That's the minute that the what we're calling MiCA MT comes into force, becomes applicable, and that's the minute also that the VFA Act is repealed.
No year, no framework.
Completely.
25.
The timing. the timing is quite interesting.
Yes.
That would be like
a Christmas gift for all regulators.
Big bang. So yes. So
gap analysis, of course,
alignment
when we can.
Align the rule book. Obviously, aligning that means our current license holders need to get their act together also and align themselves upwards or downwards, because we do see both sides.
Exactly.
Downwards should be easy.
Obviously, no surprise here, because they will know that looking at MiCA, this is what we would expect. So we're just smoothing out the transition. So that's one. Obviously, our processes needs to change. We're very lucky once again to be part of many working groups, so we know roughly what would be expected from all the NCAs. So we're trying to adjust. I mean, how do you authorize? What type of information do you ask?
What else do we need to do that we haven't been doing?
Is there, what else a specific tool I need to buy? Is there something else I need to do?
Or we can formats that we need to use, templates.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, right now it's not us doing
whatever we want.
Whatever we want in our own backyard. So we'll have to communicate with ESMA. We'll have to communicate with the EBA. How do you do it? So a lot of changes there. And then, of course, a lot of outreach. I mean, we're super approachable, but we're always doing outreach initiative. Today is a testament of that, a podcast. Later on this year, we have a great event that we're planning. 16 November, save the date. So that will be a super good event.
Thank you, FSA, for the support also in that.
Of course, thanks for the FSA. So 16 November, where we're hoping to bring all stakeholders together. So
the ESMAs, the EBAs of this world,
all the big boys from the supervisory authorities.
Few jurisdictions also, because it's interesting to see. Because this is a European effort.
Yes, for sure. But we also want to bring the industry. It's great. As regulator, we can speak for hours of how great MiCA is and what am I doing
how great we are. But yes, Jonathan, you want to add something?
I mean, listening to the replies and the questions in the past few minutes, I think you may be taking this for granted, but it highlights, I think, the immense, let's say, benefit of dealing with an authority which understands the industry. And this will come to the fore as, I think, an underestimated issue by
maybe we take it for granted because this is what we've been doing for a while, right?
Exactly. I mean, we're doing this for the past 5 years or so, and ultimately this may prove to be a very increasingly important point for service providers, especially those perhaps which have not yet been operating in Europe and are looking to enter Europe following the introduction of MiCA as well.
Because the other guys who have at least some kind of AMLD5 registration have a taste, let's say just a taste of what regulation is all about and how NCAs go about it. The others
would not have any experience whatsoever.
Sure.
So imagine perhaps, a bit of a culture shock that they would face.
For sure.
In terms of, entering a continent, ultimately.
Completely.
With, let's say, a new set of laws, which everyone will have to get accustomed to. And added on top of that, they might be speaking a language which perhaps, the counterpart might not be understanding.
Sure. To potential supervisors who are just starting on this journey, which is it is a new journey for most of us anyway.
So I think this definitely, let's say, is a feather in the, let's say, the authorities' hat. And I think also the 16th of November will serve as an opportunity to perhaps, showcase all of this. And
but not just showcase, because it's very easy to showcase, but I think we need to share our experience with our colleagues from different member states, because this is not our project. It's a European project. It's a project we fully support, because essentially it reaffirms what we've been saying for the last 5 years, that this is a sector that needs to be taken seriously. It has huge potential and it can be regulated. I think this is what we've been saying all along. And I think MiCA is proving us quite right on this, and I'm very proud to have been a part of this journey and seeing where we're heading going forward. On just taking away from what we've been doing, and I assume that I think Camille more or less went through the whole process of where we are in the preparations that we're doing.
Potentially, if we can touch upon the point that Jonathan made with some international group that are looking maybe for a new home, and maybe we can speak a bit about what we're doing there, what maybe some of the benefit we have as Malta. So the audience might know or not, but under MiCA there is this concept of simplified authorization procedure.
Good point. Yes.
Which I think is really key to mention here, which basically states that if you were under a MiCA equivalent regime, if you're already authorized, when you want to be reauthorized or authorized as a GASP, the process can be simplified. How can it be simplified? Essentially, looking at the document that your NCA already has and looking at the document that would be necessary for an authorization, you can just say, oh, okay, so I have A, B, C, D. I just need a revised version of E.
But it's not just the document, it's the process that goes through the authorization, right?
Exactly. So essentially, we take it in account that you're known to the authority.
Sure.
So you don't need to start the process from scratch.
Zero, yes.
And I think that's key for two reasons. One, for an existing license holder, it would be much easier to become CASP here. I mean, obviously, they're free to go into any other jurisdiction. No, we cannot prevent them, but I think it has a benefit of staying in your home jurisdiction. But for any international group that wants to come, or even someone from Europe that might not be under a MiCA equivalent, if today you apply and become a VFA service provider, you will be able to benefit from that simplified authorization procedure.
Because as we said, we're going through the gap analysis, ramping up our VFA framework to make it, let's call it MiCA equivalent, and therefore when MiCA becomes applicable, because it is into force already, essentially it would be a very simplified approach, a quick top up if we may,
exactly,
and tick a few boxes, and this is how we're thinking it should work anyway. And very soon after the applicability date, have a MiCA license, and that means passporting, right?
Passporting, legitimate, etc. And I think this is really important point, because obviously we're all excited about MiCA, but as we mentioned, the first application will be able to be submitted in January 25.
Yeah.
Today, if I was an international group looking for a home, what can I do?
Do you wait?
Do I wait
something
until
different?
And the importance of this cannot be understated, because it's not going to be, let's say, what's been effectively the scenario up until now, where if a particular service provider does not perhaps, let's use the word enjoy, or does not make it in terms of obtaining a license in a particular jurisdiction, they can always say, well, it's just collateral damage, we'll just move on to another jurisdiction altogether.
Sure.
Now we're talking about the European Union.
The license, yes.
So, I mean, if there are service providers, of course, which are ready to give up Europe as a continent in terms of their business, well, I mean, that's up to them. But if they don't
how can you?
if they start, let's say, not thinking about it, not now, but yesterday.
In fact,
then,
Jonathan, this is exactly what I wanted to ask you. So I'll just ask it anyway, but keep saying what you're saying. Essentially, being a practitioner, being in the field for many years, what's your advice to these crypto asset service providers out there in view of MiCA coming out? So again, what's your advice to the local population, and you're the chair of the association of that local population, but more than that, the advice to anyone else out there, both operating in Europe with the MLD5 registration, but as you're mentioning right now, those guys outside of Europe who might not want to ignore such a space.
Starting off, perhaps, with the local space. Well, I guess the message is that, their decision to choose Malta is finally vindicated. Because, I mean...
Yes, you made the right choice.
Ultimately, I mean, Malta was the first EU member state to introduce a comprehensive framework regulating crypto assets.
Correct.
And back then, perhaps there were some comments that the framework is excessive, too restrictive.
For sure.
But now,
I think that
course,
was the general criticism, right?
Certainly. But now I think definitely they can, turn back on their criticizers and say, well, I mean, we were right in choosing Malta all along.
So, yes.
And see the benefit of all the investments, because obviously stringent requirements come with cost. So you didn't spend all of that money developing all those processes and getting all those tools for nothing. Because let's not forget, and this is what I mentioned of this step up from AMLD5, all the current companies right now in AMLD5 will have to spend a lot of resources, time and money,
and it's not
to
just
get
the
there.
money.
If that investment has already been made,
it's the effort and getting it right, because you can throw a lot of
And
money.
not just that,
finding the
however,
right
but-
people and building the processes and the
But
frameworks.
also those entities or service providers which have never undergone a full licensing process have no idea what's laying in wait for them.
Yes.
Especially if they're going to be dealing with an NCA, which perhaps has never regulated crypto assets
Also.
to such an extent.
Double-edged sword,
limited
right?
experience on both sides.
So that's why I mentioned that if they are seriously considering either the initiation or the continued provision of services in Europe, well, the time to act was yesterday, not today, but yesterday.
So is that your message? You're already too late. You should really start thinking. And
If they haven't started thinking, then it's not even an opinion. I think it's a fact. They're definitely late.
especially the timelines that we mentioned already, the 6 to 9 months licensing
of
time
course,
frame.
yes.
And the average you mentioned, imagine you don't have one, but an NCA could have 20, 30, 40 applications, even hundreds potentially, and being processed by a team with very little experience.
Yes,
It takes me back to 2020, right? When we were starting our work at both of us joined more or less the same time, but specifically for this project.
Of course.
And it was difficult. It was tough.
Of course it was difficult. I mean, we're very lucky that we're super driven. There was a push, so we were supported. So this is how we made it through. But another NCA that maybe is not equipped, doesn't necessarily enjoy or has a risk appetite toward crypto, because I mean, some NCA, I'm sure, are not happy with MiCA. I mean, some NCA are not interested at all in crypto, so they will not make any efforts to speed up things. They might actually either reduce or actually opt out of the transitory period and say, no, I don't want anyone doing
Zero
crypto
risk,
in my jurisdiction. So you'll be authorized when you'll be authorized. I mean, it's always a privilege.
So this is interesting. How the scenario will act out. So the
That's-
advice is,
And let's also not underestimate
Act.
the potential issue that will certainly arise, I would say, that they will be asked to ramp up their operations, including employing competent personnel. And the
There's gonna
talent
be a
pool within the crypto
scarcity.
industry
The
is
talent
already
pool
quite
is what
limited.
it is.
For
Yes.
sure.
So that's why I said that essentially, yes, I mean,
No, I
they
should
need to
already
act
have.
immediately.
I should already have the application on my desk. If you're serious.
Ideally, yes.
good. So yes, I think that's quite it's a good thought, but it's also a scary thought, because I think everyone's been adopting a wait and see. But again, as I mentioned earlier, the clock has started to tick, and the race is on. It is going to be a race.
Yes, and also this is an opportunity for existing or prospective VASP to potentially capture new market share, because here, again, we'll have a new race. Everyone starts the same. Everyone will apply at the same time. The first one to get a CASP license in Europe is the first one that can passport.
For sure.
And there's an advantage to that.
For sure.
So what we're already seeing now, different market shares, some leaders and whatever, that might change completely, because someone might take advantage of that and say, hey, if I'm one of the first CASP, guess what? I might be able to capture a certain market because I'm legitimate. I might be able to open bank accounts, might be able to onboard new clients because I'm able
Sure.
to demonstrate how serious I am.
Sure.
Well, maybe before I was not even thought of. So
Sure.
In
there is
fact,
even...
I would say that, in my personal opinion, there are currently, or there have been, two golden opportunities to open up, say, a crypto exchange. 2013, when there was the first, let's say, significant boom in which, let's say, retail users invested, and now, today.
Okay.
Because ultimately, as Camille said, this will, let's say, signal an
But that's
altogether
when you
new
can
start.
set yourself apart.
It's a new
Really.
page. Yes,
It's
we
a
are
completely new
starting.
page.
It's a new chapter actually in the
Exactly.
crypto space.
And I'm super pleased that our local license holder are well positioned in that race. That means that they can become even more leader, and we have already a couple leaders. So
Yes,
really
yes.
exciting. On the on if I may on the exchange, we've seen different business model obviously coming on our desk, the application and whatever. First, in 2018, everyone wanted to open an exchange. Then I think the market realized this is not easy. I need a certain liquidity. I need a certain amount of users, etc. As a practitioner, what type of business model do you see today? Do you see mostly people wanting to open an exchange, being, let's say, dealing on an account, being a broker? How do you see the space evolving?
I
Because
think
we've seen that change, from everyone is an exchange to then, listen, it is difficult to compete with some of the big boys. Let's capture another niche or provide a service that was
Yes.
not provided before.
Sure.
I think one may argue that perhaps the crypto exchange space, in terms of opportunities available, let's say, may be starting to become a bit saturated.
Yep.
But you touched upon it. I think one often overlooked, let's say, type of stakeholder within the ecosystem, which may stand to be, let's say, revolutionized with the applicability of MiCA, are precisely market makers. Because most market makers are unregulated to this day. And I think what we have seen happening to crypto exchanges in terms of them being pushed towards, let's say, more regulated postures, let's call them that. I think the same thing will happen as well with market makers. And we cannot underestimate the important role that market makers play within the ecosystem. Because without liquidity, you don't have business. And market makers introduce much of the liquidity that we see on the platforms of CASPs. So I think that perhaps, if I may, nuance my previous comment a bit further, maybe now is the right time to think about, opening up a regulated market making business.
Okay.
And on the, if I must another question on the population, as in the target customer in 2018, etc., we're seeing that the main target was often retail.
Sure.
And so why we had VFA exchanges, targeting retail, etc. But the last few years, we've really seen, institutional investor wanting to come in the space, which obviously need very different services, because as an institutional, I might prefer to use a broker that gives me access to 10, 20 exchanges because each of them have something, or maybe I'm able to do margin trading, or services that an institutional investor would require that a retail doesn't have. Do you also see that change as a practitioner? Do you see institutional or prospective applicants saying, I want to open something just for the institutional investor? Do you see that shift as well?
Rather than institutional investors per se, because institutional investors
Or
can qualify as retail investors, I think that maybe we shall see this in the level 2, let's say, legislation to be issued by the competent authorities. But I hope that the definition of an experienced investor changes under MiCA in relation to how it is already set out under MiFID. Because the reality is that what is an experienced investor in crypto might be miles away from what is an experienced investor in relation to financial instruments.
Completely.
So we have to, I think, acknowledge that crypto assets may not be as similar to financial instruments as one would hope to think. And that essentially, to use the quintessential example of a kid with a computer who might have a lot more experience in dealing with crypto assets than, say, a traditional banker, this is very much a reality. We cannot then force that young person to be treated as a retail investor if experience will show that actually that person can qualify as an experienced investor in a much better way than, say, a traditional investor.
Sure. Okay. Thanks for that. We're coming to the end of our session. I just have one final question, which potentially will make the way to another podcast sometime in the future.
Number 5.
I just keep spreading my wings here. MiCA and what's in scope in MiCA. We all know
what's not in scope.
The limitations, the problems with DeFi, the problems with NFTs. And again, I don't expect solutions here because there will be a MiCA 2.0 or at least a 1.1 for sure in the very near term, but 2.0 also going forward. So what's your take on this? And I think the difficulties is how do you determine the scope, especially with DeFi? What is DeFi? What is an NFT, and when is an NFT or not an NFT? And again, how do we as NCAs come up to the same conclusions? Is this a problem? How do we deal with it?
I mean, we are generally talking about DeFi and NFTs being excluded. The reality is that start to go, for instance, with NFTs, because the MFSA incidentally issued a position paper on NFTs very recently. The way that NFTs are defined under MiCA is that they are crypto assets that are unique and not fungible. So far, so good. But then it also goes on to say that the value of these, let's say, unique and non-fungible crypto assets must also be attributable to the utility and also the unique characteristics of the crypto asset itself. Yes. And if we take a look at some of the most popular NFT collections, where one might, I would say, argue that their value is attributable to their uniqueness, to their unique characteristics, but is their value actually attributable to the unique rights assigned to the holders? In most collections, that is not the case.
Sure.
So will they be excluded under MiCA or not, even though they are the quintessential examples of NFTs as we know them today?
Again, not an easy question, and there's no real answer. I think
the utility argument. I mean, right now, most of the NFTs don't have any utility. I mean, this is almost an investment vehicle.
Yes.
It's collectible, digital artwork or collectible.
It has
how you want
utility
to call
for
it?
me because it gives me pleasure, and
yes,
I own it.
I hope it will. The NFT space will evolve beyond the digitalized apes and and aliens. But again, we have to face the reality as it is today. Most NFTs are actually digital representations.
And again, I think MiCA will address it on a case-by-case basis because there's always that. But again, a very grey space. And I think a lot of discussion needs to be taken.
It gets even grayer in relation to DeFi because the exclusion.
Who's responsible at the end of the day?
If I am to give perhaps a personal interpretation to the exclusion, which again excludes services when they are provided in a fully decentralized manner without any intermediaries.
Fully decentralized manner.
The reality is that full decentralization is a myth. It does not exist.
Yes.
So what is actually meant by the legislator? Does the legislator mean that effectively, let's say, the provision of services is beyond N1's control and that there are truly no intermediaries involved? That is a more plausible interpretation. But again, it is just a personal interpretation. And one cannot deny that the DeFi space has grown tremendously in the past few years, and having this kind of uncertainty, I think, would potentially, harm the prospects of the European Union in progressing further in DeFi. Because actually, while some other jurisdictions may have been seen as leaders on crypto assets in different areas, actually in DeFi, the EU is already a leader from an industry perspective. So we wouldn't want to lose the lead on this due to this, let's say,
and
uncertainty.
unfortunately, as I guess, as it always happens, legislation is always playing a catch-up to the actual real world out there. And let's not forget, this is version 1.0. I think it was a brilliant attempt, and well done to everyone who contributed to it, including our VFA framework, I guess, somewhere along the line. And we do expect it to be refreshed very soon because, as you're saying, DeFi is becoming a more...
it cannot be ignored anymore.
It cannot be ignored.
It's there.
It cannot be out of scope, or because it is one big space that also needs to be somehow, again, I'm not sure how, but somehow regulated and bring in the controls and the assurances that MiCA is bringing into the normal space of crypto.
I think similar to NFT, I think DeFi needs to mature a bit more because right now it's really difficult to put your finger on the exact services and how it works. Because obviously to develop a regulation, you need to have a very good understanding. I mean, when you look at the operation of a CASP, it's been a couple of years. It's around. You can identify the services. You can say what works, what doesn't.
Although there are other services which are not captured by MiCA themselves, which even there we need to spice things up.
NFT is a technology. This is all it is. How I'm seeing it, But how do you use it? How do you apply it? And whatever. This I think needs to mature a bit more. Same thing with DeFi, because I think there's a lot of confusion when you're talking about DeFi. A lot of people confuse it with even decentralized organization, and I'm DeFi because there's not a centralized entity behind or whatever. I think we need a bit of maturity in the space, because to me, most of the DeFi operator out there, are identifiable legal entity that provides services. Yes, in an innovative manner, but you're operating a trading venue. You're providing, reception and transmission of orders. So the fact that you call yourself a software company and not a CASP, this is not enough for me.
If you use the term DeFi to escape regulatory capture, then ultimately, that is...
It's not going to work so much.
It's not going to work, and that's the way it should be.
Yes.
But I would say that conversely, if, let's say, you have simply deployed a set of contracts, some coding onto a blockchain, and then it's running on its own steam, and you may perhaps play a part in terms of updating that code accordingly from time to time.
Are you responsible?
Should you be responsible for that? And again, the jury's still out on that, so we shall still be seeing what will happen
because
on that.
Then we come to a place where we say, okay, code is low. Should we look after software developer? Should they be responsible? And also there's a whole thing.
But AI will solve all this, right?
Yes.
That's another podcast for you.
2023 highlight.
Okay, guys, I think we are running out of time. Any final comment you'd like to make before I thank everyone for being with us.
First of all, I would like to thank you and for this invitation. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I guess my final comment is that it's going to be act now, and also that's going to be a very interesting, 2 to 3 years ahead. Far more, perhaps, interesting than what we have encountered to date, especially from a regulatory perspective.
For sure, I subscribe to that view. Camille?
Cannot agree more. I mean, we're on the cusp of really historic moment in EU. We can become leaders, and I think that's really, really exciting to be in the space, or even to think of being in the space. And I'm thinking of the future generation here. I mean, if I was a student of someone looking at a new industry or or a career, I would seriously consider this industry, because this is not the Wild West
Maybe
anymore.
join our team as well, right?
Let's
put in a free advert. But
yes, but I think that there is now what was a niche before, really, but regulatory affairs in crypto.
It's becoming mainstream, right?
A really, really serious thing. I mean, before you could count, on one hand a crypto lawyer. I mean, on LinkedIn, there's a ton of them, because that's the hype. But
sorry, Jonathan.
But he's a real crypto lawyer.
Thank you.
But yes, I think there's a career. So for someone that is interested both in technology and regulation, financial services, this is a niche that I would pursue, because you will have work. This is only starting. I mean, what's currently the crypto is very small. One key figure to highlight that: the total crypto market cap is under 2 trillion. The market cap of Apple, so one share on one stock exchange, is 9 trillion. Crypto is a drop in the ocean.
Sure.
So we see, Bitcoin 30K, 60K, this is nothing. When you compare to the real capital market or financial services, crypto is still a baby. So
this is
what if
the beginning?
Yes. What if crypto as an entire sector reach the market cap of Apple? I mean, we're talking,
which is doable, right?
Yes. I mean, we're talking about a 4x. And then sky's the limit. So I think this is really an interesting industry to be in.
Plus, since the industry is becoming regularized and more traditional, or at least we're adopting the traditional principles to the industry, yes, all the supporting services will kick in. All the
and this is
AML,
where the real money pours
managers,
in.
The advisors,
the institutional investors, smart money will pour money in when there's regulation. We're seeing. Look at even in the US. I mean, all those ETF and whatever. Yes. There's such big announcements now of really big guys saying, "Okay,
we're in.
It's time." So when these guys put money in such sector, it's gonna grow. We're not talking about just retail, ICO, scams. That's
it's becoming real.
It's becoming real.
So act now, because it's becoming real. How's that as a final comment?
I fully agree.
Thank you, guys. I think it was a really good discussion. I really enjoyed it. I hope the audience also enjoyed hearing to this podcast. Of course, can I remind you to keep the 16th of November free? This would be a physical conference, so we would urge you to join us on 16th November. More details will be issued on our website and the FSA's website in the coming weeks and months. So keep tuned and thanks once again to Jonathan and Camille and the FSA. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.